was if it really hit the fan, units from all of 1st Marine Division would send in a squad or something to a central location, and they, by the time they got them all together, it was probably a reinforced company or something like that. And I was on provisional rifle, and they, oh boy, the thing went for like a week or 10 days. And they told us, just, you know, get your cots and drag them out of the hooch and set them up over here in the assembly area, and we'll have the trucks right here. You know, if the alarm goes off, boom, we pile in the trucks and go. And which was, I keep digressing, but we're out there in our cots laying there, and it's kind of nice out. The temperatures aren't too bad and stuff. And you see what looks like white heat lightning out over the South China Sea. You know, I wonder what that is. Pretty soon, there's a huge, and you're on this canvas cot, and it's stretched pretty tight, and it's like a drum head, and it lifts you off and back down again. You go, whoa, what's that? And then pretty soon you're going over the top of you, and eventually you hear it detonated way back in someplace. That was the New Jersey cutting loose, and they were sitting, you know what New Jersey is, right? The four Iowa-class battleships, the last battleships they made, New Jersey, they reactivated it for Vietnam.
Yeah.
And I think they claim the range on the 16-inch guns was 27 miles or something like that. So they'd be sitting 5 miles off and shooting at something 10 miles back in. So you'd never hear them, but you knew it was them.
Yeah.
But at any rate, I guess it was the next morning, things started blowing up around the area. And they told us, okay, saddle up, we're going. We all piled into the trucks, and nobody tells you anything about where you're going, what's going on, anything else.
Yeah.
But we go into the back of these 5 tons, and they take a full blast out the gate, heading south towards 1st Marine Division. So out of 7th Engineers, there's a quarter of a mile or something, then you got to 11th Motors Battalion, and you went right through their battalion, then you had to make a right angle turn over, and then another right angle turn, and then you went into 1st Marine Division. So we're coming into 11th Motors at a pretty good clip, and all of a sudden things started blowing up all around us. You go, whoa! And the truck driver panicked, and he stood on the brakes, and when he did that, a couple of people piled off the tailgate, and everybody said, no, keep moving, get back on. So they got everybody back on again and moving again. All this is, you know, in a matter of seconds. And by the time we're moving again, then you're coming up to that point where you have to make that right angle turn. And all of a sudden, boom, there's a mortar round right smack where we would have been if he hadn't hit the brakes and stopped.
Yeah.
Anyway, then we went down to 1st Marine Division, and everybody formed up, and like that's a couple hundred people, and lined up on both sides of the road and started heading out right where we had just come from. There was a couple of big villages there, and again, they didn't tell us anything. They just kind of got the drift. We're going to go up there and we're going to sweep through these villages, and we got a couple hundred yards outside the wire. All of a sudden, a machine gun opens up on us from that village that we just come through, and scratching your head. And they weren't coming real close. I don't know, 10, 20. You could really hear those bullets, those zinging by your ear. And there's not a whole lot of thinking that goes on at this point. I just dove sideways, and I suppose the ditch was 6 feet deep, but it was full of concertina wire. So I went down in there, and I was glad to be there, but I was a little worried about getting tangled up in it. And then they got there pretty quick. I don't know what happened, but the Vietnamese Rangers came roaring in from the other direction with armored personnel carriers, and they just went back in that village and just started shooting the place up. And I don't know what the bottom line was, but things got quiet, and then we turned and swept through the village, and that was the end of it. Very anticlimactic, but that was our day of playing grunt.
Yeah. So, was that mortar round like the closest call you ever experienced?
Those, they were coming really close. Back in the in battalion, we had a pass up there that we manned, and the radio came down from the pass, and it was malfunctioning. They said, "Get this thing fixed, hurry up." So boom, I went running into the shop and tore it up, and I was sitting there playing with it, and all of a sudden I went blind. About the same time I heard a big boom. I said, it takes a while to sort this all out. This rocket landed right outside the hooch, and it shook loose all the dust and dirt off the rafters up above. So all of a sudden, boom, the whole world just went opaque. And evidently I did figure it out pretty quick, because I hot-footed it out of there and out and dove over into the bunker on the other side. And I went out and looked the next day. Our bunker was on top of the command bunker, which was what they were aiming at, and it became pretty obvious that they were very good at hitting what they aimed at. I went around to the other side of the command bunker, and there was the impact area from that rocket, and you could see where it had sprayed shrapnel and stuff all the way up there. And if he'd been another 10 or 20 feet over, it could have gotten pretty hairy.
Yeah. So did that kind of stuff happen frequently, or was it usually?
Not out in the companies, almost on a daily basis. Where we were, generally speaking, I mentioned FLC, Force Logistics. It was such a huge target. You could shoot from 10 miles away. You were probably going to hit something. And then the air base. They really wanted to knock out the air base. So that one night was at MAG 15, Marine Air Group 15. They hit their fuel supply, and that was a spectacular fire. Another night they hit an ammo dump way over on the other side of the Nang, but that was lighting up the night and stuff, so that was exciting. And there was one night where I was just talking about where we took our truck ride over to 11th Motors. It really wasn't very far, a couple hundred yards across there between our two compounds. And something was out there one night. I don't know what it was, but you've heard them talk about Puff the Magic Dragon. Puff and some helicopter gunships came in and just started blasting this area. Say a quarter mile by a quarter mile across. And they just blew apart everything that was in there. And that was, a couple hundred feet from where we were. So it was a fireworks show like nothing you've ever seen before. I don't know if there was anybody out there or not, but they expended a lot of ordnance to find out. And the same thing happened another time on the other side of the battalion. Oh, they were shooting it up out there for like an hour. And that was just before I rotated. And then I rotated and came home, and I happened to pick up a copy of Time magazine. And they had an article about Vietnam. Wait a minute, they're talking about that night outside the wire. And the way they wrote it up, it sounded like the Battle of the War or something like that. I really didn't think it was much of anything. I can't go into it further than that on the record.
So, when you were passing through those villages, were you able to meet any Vietnamese civilians?
Meat. You're standing there with an M16 locked and loaded, and they're trying to pretend like nothing is going on. They're going about their normal everyday life. So, you kind of come up there and they're standing there and excuse me here, and I walk by them, and they just completely ignored us like we weren't even there. We had a number of people who worked in the compound at battalion. The standing joke always was every battalion pretty much had a native barber, and the inside joke always was that the barber was a VC informant. They had the locals that you'd give them, I suppose 50 cents. They'd do your laundry for you. And I guess it was Koreans who were running our electricity plant. But we had a lot of civilians that were working in the battalion.
Yeah. Were your relations with them like friendly or just like distant?
The girls were really good looking, and the girls didn't want to have anything to do with the American military. They'd walk the other way.
Yeah.
I think that their parents told them to stay away from those filthy Americans, are bad. Yeah, contact outside the battalion area was pretty limited. And, you know, if you ran into each other, they'd be out along the roads trying to sell cold pop or I don't know, all kinds of other junk. I-Corps, I think the whole thing was what they called a free fire zone. You probably heard the stories originally that they said that you're out there and you see enemy out on the hillside and you had to call back to the division and they could to get permission to shoot and stuff. That was like in 65 and 60. Eventually what they did is they just moved all the civilians out of the countryside and put them in close to the big cities and provided them with security and stuff. So the civilians were all, I mean, if you want to use the term concentration camps, that's what they were, big resettlement camps.
Yeah.
And they weren't happy about that. And I think they were kind of mad at us about the situation.
Yeah.
But they weren't overtly friendly or hostile, either one, for the most part.
Yeah. I doubt they knew much about what was going on, did they?
I think they knew for the most part that a lot of this is from reading later on. They say a very big deal there. The land of your ancestors and stuff. You know, if you've got a 10-acre patch there, it belonged to your family for 50 generations. And they did not like it at all being moved off of that patch of ground. That really irritated the hell out of them.
Yeah.
And the North Vietnamese and the VC kind of played on that, I think, trying to disrupt the typical village life. Did you hear about these CAP platoons, civic action platoons? They'd take a Marine Corps squad and they'd put them out in these villages and they'd live there and provide security along with the local militias and stuff. And evidently, it worked really well. It was very effective. It's a good way to get killed because the VC and stuff, they would come in and try and take out those platoons. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you got 12 Marines by themselves out in the middle of nowhere, and somebody, 20 or 30 people, hit them with machine guns and stuff. It gets hairy. But I think that seemed to work, but the whole thing wound down before they really find out how effective it was.
Yeah. So, did you have any other like really memorable experiences while you were deployed?
The day that ASP-1 blew, Hill 327 was 1st Marine Division headquarters and 327 meters high, so it was 1,000 feet high, you know, pretty good sized mountain.
Yeah.
Distances are hard. I would say it was 2 miles south of us, but that's just kind of a guess. And around the edge of 327 was ammunition supply point number 1, ASP-1. So all the artillery, mines, anything you can imagine was all stored there. And it sounds really goofy, but the local Vietnamese were scavenging in the dump outside the wire, and they'd find sea rations that hadn't been eaten. So they got a bunch of these sea rations and they brought them up there and they built themselves a little fire to heat the sea rations with. Well, the fire got away from them, went through the wire into ASP1. And what they say, that first of all, it hit the third class ammo. Third class ammo is any ammo that's been damaged or whatever. At any rate, it started cooking off, which is not a good thing. But then the people in charge knew 2,000-pound bombs were stored right next to that spot. And they're going, whoa, this fire is going and we can't really control it. Get everybody out of here. So they did. And it was a Sunday morning. And all of a sudden you heard just a huge explosion. You're looking around, there's nothing going on here. And everybody just kept on going. A little while later, you heard another one and another one. Finally, they came and got us. They said, everybody get up on the bunkers and put on your helmets and your flak jackets. And then you'd look off down to the south, and you could see these mushroom clouds coming up from around the corner of 327. You could kind of figure out after you've been having these huge explosions for hours, you knew that the ammo dump was finally going. And about dusk, we were sitting there, and I figured, well, it's got to wind down pretty soon. And the way we were looking, you could see off for a mile or two to the south. And I'm sitting there on the sandbags, and all of a sudden the world turned red, and then you saw the shock wave coming at you, and it was far enough away. You had a long time to sit there and look at it. You go, well, what do we do? We're already on the bunker. It hit us hard enough. It knocked you backwards off the sandbags. It didn't really do any damage. But our Bravo company was down there right next to it. And they said, oh, it was unbelievable. He said, there's flying, washing machines and trucks and everything else flying by. And I suppose everything quieted down after a day or so, and then it took them a month or two to go all through the whole area and find all that ammo that had blown up but hadn't detonated, and you know, just a mess. I never heard if anybody's heads rolled for that one or not, but it probably cost you a lot of money to get all that ammo out there, and it didn't do much good.
Yeah.
So that was memorable.
So when did your deployment end?
September of 1969.
Okay. Do you remember how you got back home?
Oh yeah, vividly. They pull us out of Vietnam, and they take us to Okinawa. And that's a weird deal. When on the way out, they took all your gear and you had it in a sea bag, and you left it in a sea bag in this warehouse on Okinawa. And like I say, exactly 13 months later, you come back, you walk up to this warehouse, and there's all of your sea bags stacked right where they're supposed to be. You know, it's a fantastic job of bookkeeping. Yeah. And they were after us there. I don't know why they kept us there for like a week, getting haircuts and telling us to try and act like normal people. But then we had liberty, so we could go into Koza City. That was the big city right outside of Koza Air Force Base. There's a lot of stuff, and that was a good time. And then got on the airplane, and that was back in 707 days, that they really didn't have the legs to do the Pacific in one jump. Like I said, we had to stop and put on gas in Hawaii on the way out. But then when we took off out of Okinawa, I tried to figure out what's going on. They were going like due north, and then finally they turned east. Did you ever hear about World War II, the firebombing of Japan?
Yeah.
They went to bomb them, and all of a sudden they found out they were going, like 150 miles an hour faster than they should be, that's when they discovered the jet stream. And so the jets in 1969, they'd had pretty well mapped out the jet streams. So they'd go hundreds of miles to the north to catch the jet stream. And then they could shoot all the way across on one load of gas because of that, I think it was 150. Someplace along the line, I think they said, our airspeed is 750 miles, 100 miles an hour faster than the airplane's supposed to go. And boom, it plopped us back down in at El Toro again.
Yeah.
And so that was, have you ever gone across the Pacific? You start jumping those time zones, and it's hard to figure. And I still can't tell you that we took off in the morning from Okinawa and landed that afternoon in El Toro. That's what, 5,000 miles or something like that. But I don't know what the real times were because you were so screwed around.
Yeah. So from the time you left Vietnam and then arrived in El Toro, how long did that take?
It was really fast.
Yeah.
I think we spent maybe a week on Okinawa, so let's say 7 days, 8 days, something like that.
Yeah. And what was it like to come back to America?
A little strange. It was, what was it? It was, I guess it was September. It hadn't gotten real cold yet. Kind of in a state of shock probably for the next few weeks. And then I still had, a year and a half left in. So I had to go back to Pendleton again until October of 70. And I didn't like Pendleton very much. That was electronics maintenance company. That they had built a new $1 million electronics shop and plop everybody in there and fix radios dawn till dusk, no windows or anything like that. And 1st Marine Division, who normally lives at Pendleton, was still over in Vietnam, and so things were kind of quiet at Pendleton. And they had a lot of people coming back from Vietnam, so they had a lot of people, and they didn't have that much to do, which is a really dangerous situation in the Marine Corps, because that means that we were standing inspections continually. And this particular company, they took great pride that the Inspector General's inspection the last couple of years, that they had been the best unit in the division. And so they were just whipped into a frenzy, wanting to keep up that record.
Yeah. So, do you remember the day that you were discharged?
Oh, yeah. I saved up my money while I was over there. When I got back to California, I bought a 750 Norton motorcycle. That sucker cruised about 100 miles an hour. And I had quite a bit of fun on that while I was at Pendleton, because I got to, running all over Southern California, Sequoia and Big Sur and all that stuff. And so I wasn't due to get out until March, and I got an early out, go back to school. At that, when I went in, they were grabbing anybody they could get to go in the military. By the time I got out, they were trying to get rid of people. They had too many, and so they cut my enlistment by 6 months. So I got on my motorcycle and rode it home.
Hey Kevin, I need to go.
Oh, yeah, that's all right.
This battery's about to die too, so I think you should wrap things up.
Did I use up all your film?
No, we have film, but
Yeah.
the battery's running a bit low, so I think you should wrap it up.
Yeah.
I probably should have warned you that I can go on like this for days or weeks. Give me a couple of beers, maybe months.
Right, yeah, so do you remember how you were received by your community and the public when you came back?
Hugely indifferent. I would say people didn't want to talk about it. And the hippie movement was very big on campus and stuff, you know, that everybody was dope smoking and protest the war.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, people didn't particularly want to talk about it, and we just kind of, I went into geology at the U, and there was a kind of an interesting blend there. There was a number of people who'd been in the military and were back, and there were some of them that were just flaming dopers and stuff, and we all pretty much got along with each other, you know, got to be friends, and
Yeah. So, how do you think your service changed you as a person?
there's, I don't know if you ever heard that joke that they said the guy from the Army was in talking to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said, well, you know, after 4 years in the Army, we figure it's going to take, you know, several months after you get out for you to return to normal. And for the Navy, you know, they spend 4 years. And the Air Force, you know, well, that takes about 2 days. He said for the Marine Corps, you're never going to be the same again. And that's probably true. They inculcate you with this attitude and this outlook that you never really lose. And I would say I wasn't particularly a gung-ho Marine.
Yeah.
I was maybe kind of normal, but there's things 50 years later that still you do it because that was the way you were trained in the Marine Corps. Just a really stupid one. You have to make your bed every morning. It's not, you have to do it. Why? Because you have to do it. And,
Yeah.
and other valuable lessons like the proper way to scrub a toilet, got that one down pat, and a lot of little things like that.
Yeah. So, have you stayed in touch with old friends from your unit?
Yes.
Yeah.
The one now lately, he's roaming around down there someplace in North Carolina. Lost it. One of the guys was here in town. He was originally from Wisconsin. Then he came over here. He was a guy I was in Vietnam with, and I kept in touch with him here for several years. And then he finally retired and moved back to Wisconsin. I haven't talked to him for a while. I got to think about there's a couple others I see occasionally, but they've pretty well scattered now. And they're getting older, so they're not as social perhaps as they used to be.
Yeah. So, if you could go back in time, would you tell your younger self to enlist again?
That's kind of a loaded question. The military isn't the same military as it was even 5 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. And I have friends who have kids who are in the military now, and talking to military people, they're doing some really, really bad things. And, you know, up until a couple of years ago, I would have said, sure, go ahead, do it. Well, I don't have any, or didn't have any college debt. The GI Bill bought me a bachelor's degree, and that was kind of a nice bonus.